Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cat's Corner. I am your host, RM, and of course, we have with us Catherine Cooke from the Fantasmagorium show, from the Unifying Force. Catherine, it's such a pleasure to have you here for episode 3 of Cat's Corner.
Thanks.
Now, Catherine, what physical media selections have you made for us today?
All right, first one here. Uh, 4K Beverly Hills Cop.
Oh,
Uh, yeah, classic Eddie. Specifically the first one. I'm not really interested in sequels and all that. Uh, Classic Eddie Murphy comedy back in his heyday in the '80s, and it's just I really liked it. I hadn't actually seen this when I first saw that they were putting it out on 4K, and so then I looked it up and I watched it. And I'm like, I gotta get this. This is just classic.
Yeah, I love Beverly Hills Cop, and it really was such a special time to have a movie like that where he could kind of go from, I guess it was Detroit. He was a police officer in Detroit, and then he makes his mark on Beverly Hills. It is really such a great film. Eddie's comedy and his ability to perform just shine in this film. But he also comes off as being kind of an action guy in it, which is almost a second plus in this. And the way that the Beverly Hills Police Department is portrayed, which it kind of looks like this $1 billion place, where you sort of step in and everybody's dressed so beautifully, and if somebody drops something in Beverly Hills, 5 or 6 police cars come to rescue whomever it is. But I just think it was very cleverly done. I agree. I didn't know that was on 4K, and I love that film. I've watched it many times through the years, and Eddie Murphy was so special when it comes to selling that Beverly Hills Cop franchise. I think he is so charming too. That's a great pick. I love that film as well, Catherine.
Yeah, I thought this was really good, and I don't know how I had not seen this before, because this one only came out, like, I believe a couple years ago, or maybe even last year. I can't remember, for 4K, but it was a really nice transfer too. You can tell they did a good job on it. But that's great movie there. This next one is one of my favorite Tim Burton films, my last favorite Tim Burton movie, which is sad because it's now on its 20th anniversary, and that's Big Fish.
Yes, Catherine. Tell me what you thought about this film, and what specifically stood out to you about Big Fish.
So, well, I liked, initially the story. It's the son kind of reconnecting with the dad and having kind of a bad relationship and believing he'd always made all this stuff up, and he starts telling him his story again, and he realizes that, oh, what do you know? There's actually elements of truth to these stories, and a lot more than he thought. And I liked that it was just kind of like, it's almost Wizard of Oz, like, if you will. You're going through this guy's life and seeing all these fantastical type things happening, but it's not too over the top like other, it's not like Beetlejuice over the top, or it's not Edward Scissorhands where it's weird. Like, it feels like it takes place in the real world, even though you do have supernatural type elements in there as well. And I thought it was mixed genre as well. They put like romance, espionage, and comedy, and little elements of horror here and there. But I thought it was such a really sweet story. I admit, when I got this last year, it was the first time I'd seen it in almost 20 years from when I first saw it. I admit it wasn't as great as I remembered it, but the fact that I still remembered it after 20 years or so, and was like, this is a great film, and it still is. And I think this is the last good movie that he made, because after that, it's kind of soured a bit. But the cast was very well. It was a very well cast film. Performances were great. I like the lore, and it's a very sweet, kind of bittersweet, somber story at the end as well. But I really liked it.
I enjoyed it as well. And one of the things that stuck out to me, and I'm pretty sure it's this film, is that he talks about how his life seemed to go by very slowly until he met this woman that he falls in love with. And then all of a sudden time seems to go by so quickly. And I really kind of love that. I thought that was quite realistic way of showing, like what it means to fall in love, and how it feels like you're running out of time and you have to do things much more quickly when you've fallen in love. And it really is a kind of an endearing film. It has a lot of romance to it. I think McGregor was great in it too.
Yeah, and it was really sad too.
Yeah.
Like when he goes back to the town that, it's like abandoned and not there anymore. It was a town that kind of existed out of time in a bit, and it's like really sad when he goes back there and sees that this is, it's all gone. And of course, the movie being called Big Fish because of the the tall tales type thing, but it does end up revolving around an actual big fish. And I liked how the son eventually comes around to having some significant, meaningful relationship with the father, even if it's at the very end, and how neat it is to see everybody from these stories showing up. And it's like, wow, they're real. But at the same time, it's kind of sad that where were all these people towards the end of this guy's life? It's like they were gone, Sort of like every time you hear somebody has passed away, some famous person, and everybody comes out of the woodwork and say, oh, they were such a great person, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, why have they been in obscurity for so long? How come nobody's been talking about them or seeing them before? It takes them dying for people to, to care again, But that was, I thought, a really great, really sweet film. This next one I had the pleasure of seeing in a movie theater for the first time this year. This is a classic from the Coen brothers. Saw it on the anniversary of the specific holiday associated with the film, and that is The Big Lebowski.
Yes.
Walter is one of my favorite John Goodman characters. It's just comic gold everywhere he goes. Steve Buscemi just playing off that the whole time and just being, oh, they're nihilists, Donnie. You don't be nothing to be afraid of. And just the whole thing is just so bizarre. It had little elements of like almost Mulholland Drive at certain points, but also trying to be like this Norrish mystery. And I like that even though the dude is, just a stoner type guy who drinks White Russians every day, he's actually one of the smarter people in the movie because he's able to actually piece the mystery together to realize what's actually going on, despite that the two other Lebowskis and his associate played by Philip Seymour Hoffman they think he's a dope and then he can't possibly put this together. It's like, no, he's smarter than you think. But it was so fun. It's like going around with his temporary Los Angeles on this weird odyssey involving bowling and missing spouses and financial cons and the weird new age artsy people. It's just a total conflagration of just bizarre weirdness that shouldn't work, but somehow it does.
It really does work, Catherine, and you're absolutely right. I mean, it doesn't feel like this movie should kind of like make any sense, but it makes total sense. And, Jeff Bridges, kind of in his bathrobe and dealing with all of this stuff, it kind of brings it down to earth a little bit. But then you have these kind of outrageous scenes where, he has a bowling ball and he throws a bowling ball. It's like these women kind of standing and it goes through their legs. And I'm like, I love scenes like that. It kind of have fun with, the concept of all of this and the notion of the players and what's important to them. But it's become such a classic. It was my mentor, one of the first persons who ever showed me how to do videography. This was his favorite film, and he just couldn't say enough about it. And it's hard to make something like what they did there, make it work and make it look good. It looks fantastic. It's a great looking film, a fun film. It's such a great pick, Catherine. You're lucky to own it on physical media.
And they did put it out in 4K eventually. This is a Blu-ray that I've had for probably 10 years now or so, but it just, and then the bit with Sam Elliott at the bar, the bar, and the way it's just kind of tying everything together. But it was a thing I also love about the humor is that it's genuinely irreverent. It's not something that's coming out of the situation as much from the situations of what's going on, just how genuinely bizarre the people in the movie are. And it's like, yeah, there's a plot, but is the plot really as important as what's going on? Not really. And I wish there would be more comedies like that. Like, so many of them are just these rank and file, we have to follow a traditional plot. There has to be a story, and they're mostly normal people doing it with bad jokes written in. Kind of like, I feel 99% of sitcoms aren't funny. And the fact that, Hollywood or whatever would rather revere movies like that, The Big Lebowski, or right now there's depending on when you're watching this, there's the commercial that's themed around Caddyshack, a 43-year-old movie. It's like, well, there's a reason for that. Those were irreverent comedies where you didn't as much care about the story. It was just, they had really brilliant comic minds writing the stuff and making it work. So I do love movies like that. Wish there would be more of them. The next one is a bit more of a modern one that I really liked, The Big Short. Yes. This is from 2014. This is my favorite Adam McKay film. And I liked the style of how it was done, like the editing and the pacing and how they're just going through and talking about just how truly stupid a lot of this financial system actually is. And that, this guy is framed almost like the Christian Bale character, almost like he's some savant, but it's like he's really not. He just looked at the numbers it said, well, in black and white, this is what's going to happen. And that's the same thing the Steve Carell character did. And yeah, it's interesting because Carell's kind of playing against type because he's, again, a smart guy running his own investment firm, and he's got his own issues, sure. But I liked that it's like basically showing people that the financial system is not as complicated as the people on Wall Street want you to think it is. And I love how they just totally lampoon it when, like, the Ryan Gosling character is like, here's Margot Robbie sipping like mimosas in a bathtub to explain, how easy this really is. And then you have like the doomsday prepper types, like the Brad Pitt character, again going through everything and like chastising the people who are bringing him in on this for celebrating the idea that the entire financial system is going to fall. But I did therefore like the way it was working. It didn't try and indict any one political party over another, like in some of Adam McKay's other movies. It's just very much, here's the system, here's what happened, and and the fact that they managed to find a way to make it kind of funny and tenable and not like some boring boardroom drama, I thought was really impressive.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a great film. And I think what it also coincides with, interestingly enough, is around that time, or a little bit maybe before 2008, people were kind of starting to do their own investing. And it seemed like there was so much focus for what used to be people had to throw in money into their retirement packages. And as there be somebody at your company who would do that. But then all of a sudden, now individuals were responsible for going ahead and looking at the market and deciding where different investments would go. And that's something that a lot of us don't want to have to even look at. Like I'm not interested in that. But then there are people who do. And I thought it was very funny that this film kind of came out a little bit after that started to happen, where people were at home becoming investors. And, all of a sudden anybody could be a broker now. And looking at how people were looking at the market, anybody could now look at the market. It was sort of this, I'm not going to say it's a breakthrough, but all of a sudden the way things were traded and done had changed so dramatically. It was good that they did this film to kind of capture that moment, which, we might never see again. But, I think it is very interesting to look at how the markets have really changed and how open it is to anyone now. It is very impressively made film.
Yeah, and one of my favorite jokes in it is probably when the Steve Carell character asks the Ryan Gosling character, look, you wouldn't have just come to us and given us this golden egg. Like, what are you going to get out of this? What's the catch? He's like, dude, there is no catch. He's like, yes, I'm going to screw you. I'm going to screw you so hard. But at the end of the day, you know what? You're not going to care that I'm going to make off with like 90% of everything, because the 10% you're going to get is going to be so astronomical. You're just going to be happy and laugh your way to the bank. But I like that the Steve Carell character doesn't really laugh his way to the bank. He does feel genuinely bad about it, which I like. And same with the Brad Pitt character, doesn't really feel good about it. And then at the end of the movie, when you have that kind of ominous thing where it says that, Michael Berry, the Christian Bale character, the hot commodity he's been investing in since the fall of the financial system was water because of drought. And that's also a very valid thing. We're seeing that, especially out in California. But so, yeah, I thought this was a great movie. And I think it's a good companion piece to another one called Margin Call, which is a much more serious film about like the days before the crash, when all the corrupt as hell bigwigs are trying to sell off all of their bad stock. And then you see that these people here are the ones who are exposing just how awful those people really are and what they did. And it's like, I disagree with the notion that critics are like, oh, we shouldn't be rooting for these people. It's like, well, I'm not really rooting for them, because it's true that I shouldn't care about them, especially shouldn't like the idea of them profiting off of all of this misery that's going to happen. But I just like that they're bringing it to the forefront and making people aware of it. But then you have other things in this movie which are bizarre. Like there's a scene when Steve Carell and his partners go down to Florida and they're at a strip club, and I love how he doesn't even care about the strippers. He says like, how do you have all these houses in your name? And she's just like, total dimwit, just totally oblivious to the fact that obviously you shouldn't be able to afford that many houses. And so it's a combination of, predatory lending and just people who are dimwitted, or those who think that, 10 years is forever. I'm going to live forever and I'll worry about it down. It's like, And now we've seen in recent years that all the protections put in place to prevent it from happening again have been repealed again. Surprise, surprise. So a really fun movie, apolitical. So it's not like it's taking sides. So I think you should see that. I think it's a pretty good movie. Next one is a really good Ridley Scott war film, one of my favorites that he did, Black Hawk Down.
Yes.
This is the extended cut, put out in 4K. This is, of course, about the U.S. military's intervention in Mogadishu in the 90s when they were trying to bring in critical aid because the dictator there was seizing all of it and people were starving to death, and it was horrible situation going on there. And it's ultimately the story of a failed campaign in which multiple Black Hawk helicopters get shot down, and you follow these guys as they have to try and get out of Mogadishu. All-star cast, by the way. It's like people start popping. I forget the people who pop up in this movie. Like, man, he got everybody under the sun. Kind of like a Band of Brothers, another Blu-ray I got over there. A bunch of people that in supporting roles who pop up here and there, and very much like this. But I love that it didn't. It kind of just stuck with the guys on the ground. It didn't keep cutting away to like the war room or whatnot. It didn't keep trying to reorient you with what's going on. It's like this whole movie takes place on just a few different blocks of the street, pretty much after, like at least after they initially get shot down. And it's really intense, high combat. It's a long movie, which it kind of needs to be because they're just taking you through all the. Thanks, Admiral Mork. And it takes you really. The cinematography is amazing. The action bits are great. So it's let's see. They say it is a 4-star knockout. I agree with that assessment for sure.
What is the difference between? You said you have the extended cut. I didn't know there was an extended cut of this film.
Yeah, I'm just looking to see if it says how much longer it is because I didn't actually. All right, so the theatrical version is 2 hours 24 minutes. The extended is only 2 hours 32 minutes, so not much longer.
Okay,
but it's still there, and I take it that's probably just more carnage because I mean probably I usually just watch the extended cut because that's also in 4K, and so it's been a long time since I've watched the theatrical cut. But I really thought this is a great movie.
Yeah, it is a great film. And I want to thank Admiral Terrier, Tiberius Mork, hi Terrier, for the 19 Norwegian kroner, a super sticker as well. And Tom, what is the super sticker? I can't see what it is on my end, but thank you so much, Terrier. It's so great for you to contribute. Thank you. So generous. Really appreciate it. And Tom's going to tell us in a minute what it is, but thanks so much, Terrier. I hope you were well. And thanks for being here. For Cat's Corner. I love Black Hawk Down. What is your next selection, Catherine?
Oh, okay, next selection. This is a recent Spike Lee film nominated for Best Picture. That's BlacKkKlansman.
Yes.
It's funny that when Spike Lee was pitched this idea about a black guy trying to join the KKK, Spike Lee's first reaction was, "What are you talking about, the Chappelle skit?" He's like, "No, it's a true story." Mm-hmm. About it takes place in the 1970s, and a member of the Colorado Springs Police Department decided just out of the blue, it's like, "Hey, why don't I try and apply to the KKK, and we'll task a white officer in the department going undercover to see what's going on." Now, the movie obviously adds some fictional stuff in there to make it more of an exciting film. Like, there's an actual like terrorist plot that they're trying to foil and whatnot. In reality, what this guy uncovered was that there were diehard KKK types at NORAD, which is that's really bad, and they ended up getting demoted and reassigned elsewhere. But I thought it was just wickedly funny satire, and the way they were able to, because it had this like buddy cop type formula, which, given how heavy some of the material is, it seems like that just shouldn't work, or you shouldn't get away with it, but it works, and it's really funny. But at the same time, you could still have these really intense scenes, like when you get to of course, what I'd say is probably the best part of the film, where you have the juxtaposition of the Adam Driver character undercover being indoctrinated into the KKK by David Duke, played by Topher Grace, and that's juxtaposed against the Harry Belafonte scene, a late great Harry Belafonte, I should say, who's talking about a Klan murder, and the way that's intercut is such great drama. And if you had seen like a scene like that in the trailer, you'd be justified in thinking that this is a drama, but it's not. For the most part, it's like, again, a buddy cop comedy, and it's just so bizarre that you can blend those things together and have it come out as well as it does. And yet this one actually does do that. And yes, like the scene, for instance, when the Adam Driver character is, he's undercover and he goes out to the shooting range, and the stuff that they're talking about on the way, these guys are such morons, and it's kind of funny to laugh at. And one of them seems almost borderline super low IQ. That's kind of funny, like, oh, the boom and stupid stuff like that. But then when they get out to the shooting range and they start shooting, you're seeing what they're using for their scarecrows. It's like, Jesus, that's like, again, like really scary. But the movie does a nice balance of that it never really seems to be making fun of it, even though, yes, it is in a way, it's almost, I mean, it's not a satire because it's something that partly happened. But that, like the scene when he just calls up David Duke inside the police headquarters, and the other officers are just kind of Yeah, everything around in their chair. Like, is he actually doing that? And it's like, yeah, actually doing that. So that, and he said, I believe that he actually, the real guy, did receive his membership card from Duke, and that he still has it. But that was just, it's just crazy. It's like, who would have thought that would have worked? And I love it when Hollywood takes a risk like that, which, again, on paper it shouldn't work, but in execution it worked very well.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out because it's so important. Spike Lee is remarkable, and I wouldn't have guessed that would have worked either. I mean, I haven't seen the film, but I've seen trailers where he's on the phone, and like the old school landline phones. And, I thought to myself, how is he going to pull this off so that, he doesn't, get in trouble or get killed even. But if anybody could do it, it would be Spike Lee. And I'm going to put that one on my list to watch upon your recommendation coming up. So what is your next selection, Catherine?
Next one is a film which was released last year, got delayed quite a bit from the pandemic, but it's The Black Phone.
Yeah.
I loved the atmosphere of the film. I loved Ethan Hawke's performance. I thought the child actors were pretty good too. I think that it's a pretty good expansion of the source material because the original story is only 20 pages long. And while I was reading it, I just felt that the author could have just, Owen King could have just expanded it into an actual novel rather than a novella, because it seemed like there was enough rich material there to do it. Whereas in the movie, I think the premise works, some of the stuff in the basement works, but I think the ending kind of comes together almost too neatly for what is being set up and the way the film is going. But like for instance, the idea that this guy wears a mask and is absolutely petrified of anybody seeing his face, not for practical reasons because he doesn't want to get caught, but he genuinely is afraid of people seeing him. Like he hears like he's hideous or something, and that was done really well. And that's not in the book. That's something they improvised here. Like the sister being kind of psychic or whatever is something she merely had a dream of being able to see where he was in the book. She wasn't actually psychic or anything like that, like you see in the film. But there's also logic issues too, because it's like, okay, this guy built the basement, clearly rigged it this way. So why did he put the phone up on the wall? And the kids are like, well, he's too afraid to answer the phone. It's like, well, then why? He clearly put the padding up behind it for the soundproofing, put the phone up there. So some of the stuff doesn't really work. And again, the way it comes together in the end is almost too neat. Like the stuff with the brother of the killer being there, that's from the story. So I guess, okay, I can't knock them too hard because they're adapting what's faithful to the story, even though I didn't feel that part of it really worked very well. But overall, I still liked it. I think it needed maybe another rewrite to rewrite the third act. But a great villain turn by Ethan Hawke, though. And just the atmosphere and everything. So that was really good.
Yeah, the atmosphere was quite ominous. It did have that sort of 1970s feel where, somebody got you, you were trapped, and there was no way to signal anybody. At least it felt that way. You could be down in somebody's basement forever and no one would ever find you. Like it kind of reminded me a little bit of The Lonely Bones, where the girl is kind of trapped in that hole.
Oh, The Lonely Bones?
Yeah. And, where she, you think she's going to get away, and of course she doesn't, but it had that feel to me, and yet that's also another 1970s story as well. But yeah, I agree, the performances of the children were excellent, and it was quite haunting and mysterious and trying to figure it out. I didn't think I wasn't exactly sure. I know that I've heard of abductions with these vans, and those 70s vans were very popular back then, even through to the 80s. Those vans were everywhere. But yeah, I was unaware that he didn't want to show his face to the child he abducted, or at least I get that sense from what you're saying. It was a good film, and I agree with you about the ending. The ending could have been stronger, but I think the effort that was put in to make this film, it just looked really, really good and quite authentic. I mean, I was terrified for those kids. So the notion, or the knowledge that a phone would be there, my first thought is they've got to be able to call for help, right?
Oh, that was another interesting thing, because in the trailers, they show his face all the time when he's like, oh, want to see a magic trick? In the movie, they don't show his face at all. They're creating like a deliberate air of mystery around it, which is like the fact that he wears this is almost like almost a neutral expression of whatever you want to read into it. And like the fact that the kids are calling him on the phone, warning him about, don't fall for this, don't fall for that. And it's almost like they're in some type of purgatory, like you said, with the Lovely Bones character. And it did feel like it was building to something more ominous of an ending than the very neat type of ending they came up with. But yeah, I thought all the pieces were there to make something that could have been better, but still a really great, just a character turn by Ethan Hawke.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Next, we have a Darren Aronofsky film, one of my favorites, Black Swan.
Yeah.
I felt this movie should have won Best Picture of the year it was nominated, because it's like, again, it's like a psychological horror, really dramatic. Natalie Portman, well-deserved Oscar, very eerie, because it's like she's rehearsing for Swan Lake and being driven crazy by it because she's, undiagnosed mental illness, but it's almost like she's also living it and the horror of it as it's going on, and you're seeing like this highly competitive world of, of ballet, and it's like kind of dark and like not just because of the seemingly supernatural things which are happening, which of course we realize are not happening. It's simply that she's losing her mind. But I thought it was a very well done type of film, a character study really. And Mila Kunis I thought was really great as a supporting character. I would never have thought in a million years to cast her in a role like that, but wow, she actually did a pretty great job. And then little bits of humor shoehorned in, just like, oh, you imagined you were with me? Was I good? And when she's having like this horrifying type nightmare bit, and then Barbara Hershey as her mom, gosh, that was really excellent scenes. And just the cinematography and the art direction, like being inside that ballet and stuff room, it felt very constricting. Like, I want to get out of this place, but you can't. And it's like, even when she's trying to escape, she can't really get out. And as one of the few times that a horror movie really has been nominated for Best Picture, which is kind of neat that it gets that kind of recognition. I thought it was definitely better than the film that did win that year, The King's Speech. But yeah, I thought this is one of my favorite Natalie Portman performances, and one of my favorite Darren Aronofsky films. It's a really great movie.
Yeah, it is a spectacular film. And I think, this is these, I'm not going to call them dream sequences, but there are these sequences that feel like dream sequences. But of course, they're really like horror sequences in a sense, because, it feels like, Natalie Portman's character is expecting a certain outcome when she starts each segment, and then is surprised at the outcome at the end. And then it's like she's being awakened out of a nightmare. And I love that sense in the film. Now, it is supposed to be about ballet, and certainly I don't know whether Natalie Portman studied as a ballerina. I don't know whether Mila Kunis. I don't even care, because it was done so beautifully. You are convinced that this is her reality and life as a performer. And there are heavy demands on these performers where this is pretty much their entire life, and they don't get a lot of time to do anything else. But I think if we're going to look at a film from an artistic point of view, it's up there in my top 10. I think it was just so amazingly done. And there aren't a lot of films that take chances like this, where she thinks that she knows the reality of what's going on. And of course, once she realizes what's occurred, she's almost, maybe not shocked, but that's not what she intended. Like, I get the sense that that's not what she wanted the outcome to be. And so she has to live with it, however. And, you're kind of left with, she has to live with the repercussions of everything that's happened, whether it was real or not. She's experienced it. And I think it does also put some credit into sometimes when people have experiences, whether they're psychedelical or whether it's a nightmare, it does have an effect over the individual. It is real to them.
Yeah.
So.
And I thought it was also kind of interesting that they cast Winona Ryder as the former favorite of the ballet teacher, because it's like, in the context of the movie, this is somebody he hasn't seen in a long time, who's like upset with him and trying to warn her that, hey, you're next. He's going to do the same thing to you and run you down as he did to me. And yet she was also in reality somebody who hadn't been seen in movies as like, for a long time. So it was kind of a bit meta at that point that they brought her in to play that role. So I thought that was quite clever. But yeah, I love that movie. Very good.
It is very good. And I also have to give them kudos for putting in a sex scene. So, I know I always talk about sex scenes, but I really enjoyed this sex scene. And I think it's important to show that there is always going to be like an element of desire in these characters, and that needs to be expressed somehow. And I do like that they decided to put that in. I think that was very ballsy to do that. And I also like how that scene turned out as well.
Right, because you could also see that a lot of that is also born out of the fact that her mom's being a very restrictive type of thing. Like her character's supposed to be like what, 20s, late 30s, and her whole room still has a bunch of little stuffed animals like little kids because the mom is still trying to treat her like she's like 5 or 6 years old, and she's trying to finally fight back from that, simultaneously dealing with the demands of and the rigors of training for a serious play. And of course, that's all coming down on her, and the mom not wanting to kind of let her gain any type of independence over herself. And so that's also a whole other dynamic to the film. So that was really very well done. This next one we actually just did a video on, but I have it in the selection of these, and that's the first Blade Runner.
Yes.
This is the final cut, the one that I have. I don't think I showed this last time. I can't remember. Maybe I did. But yeah, the final cut is kind of the one I only ever saw. I never saw the theatrical cut or whatever. There's too many cuts of this movie, but it's, yeah, like we talked about. If you guys haven't seen it, we did the video with Cameron Pasha and RM about the reviewing both of the Blade Runner films. But this one, of course, very iconic. I do like the Roy Batty character the most, and I wish the movie followed him more than it follows Rick Deckard. It's like, I get it. Rick is on a protagonist kind of arc where he realizes, he kind of discovers his humanity, if you will, by the end of the film, and that he's a better person as a result of what happens with him at the hands of Roy Batty. But I still thought Roy and his plight, you sympathize with it immediately with the opening text on the screen, and I just wish the movie followed him more. But the design was really cool. This kind of rundown, futuristic, retro sci-fi type Los Angeles. I would imagine that George Lucas kind of based the underground of Coruscant on this type of world, because that's kind of what it looks like. You see a bit of the less seedy version of that in The Fifth Element as well. But again, a movie that's been talked to death and analyzed to death about what it means to be human or to android or does it matter. But yeah, this is another one that people have said. I mean, I wrote the focus of my film theory thesis was this film as well. I'd have to dig it out again because it's been years, so I'd have to remember what argument I was making about it. But yeah, it was again, a good iconic movie. I admit I don't like it as much as the sequel. It does feel a bit trying at its pace, even though it's much shorter than the sequel. The sequel feels like it's a much more, almost like a faster, leisurely type film. But yeah, that's another one that you gotta see if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, I agree completely, Catherine. Like we did do the review, but I love Blade Runner. I think it's such a unique film, and I just love the lighting in that film, which is it's just so hypnotic. It really is remarkable, and I think that the adaptation, let's say if we're going to talk about the book to the movie, right? This was. I think that the changes they made from the book to the movie are perfect. I don't find any problem with it whatsoever, and it really has created a fantasy of this world for them that is just. I still want to go there. I know it's polluted and everything, but I still want to go to the first Blade Runner's Earth and see what it's like to live there.
Yeah, he wrote 3. I believe Philip K. Dick wrote 3 books in that world before it was expanded on by other people. Mm-hmm. But the title was taken from a completely unrelated book in which they made this weird deal that you won't use this title again or adapt this story. And I don't know why they would do that, because in the book Blade Runner, which has nothing to do with the subject matter, it's about people who are running like medical supplies illegally across borders and stuff like that, like scalpels and stuff like that. So a Blade Runner. I don't know why they got hooked on that for this title, because it really makes no sense whatsoever. It's like, you're an assassin. How are you? It's kind of funny, but I do think the scripts for this and the sequel came together a lot more than the other books in the series. And I mean, yes, it is a little different. Like, do androids dream of electric sheep, which pretty much sums up the whole central question of the movie, which is how alive or self-aware, sentient is artificial intelligence, and how much is it actually? But yeah. This next one is actually 3 films by Edgar Wright, but it's part of the Blood and 3 Flavors Ice Cream Cornetto trilogy. You have Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End. Now, I remember when my friends and I, we all went to see Shaun of the Dead in theaters in 2004. I didn't really know what to expect because I hadn't really. I mean, I was familiar with parody films because by then the first 3 scary movies had already come out. But this was really good because it's taking a genre which I'm not really much a fan of, which is the zombie genre, because I feel it's just so much of it is just the same thing done over and over again. But because of the 2 characters, it's like Sean on the one hand he's not an overachiever for sure, not even by the slightest, but he certainly has better prospects in his life than his friend Ed, his roommate, who just sits on the couch playing video games all day, not paying attention. They have a roommate who's much more advanced in his career than they are, who just hates both of them and can't stand that he has to roommate with them. And to sum up just how zombified everything actually isn't, they start the movie with this montage of Sean, going through the morning routine and going to the corner store and going to work and coming back, and just how dead and just uninterested and dull everybody is. And then the morning after the apocalypse has happened, he just walks through the same thing, totally oblivious to the fact that they're now all zombies, because it just isn't really any different. And that was a great kind of commentary on that. And the fact that, his big master plan to survive the zombie apocalypse is, we'll just go to the windshield. We'll just go to the pub because it's okay. Yeah, it's made of stone to a point, but then it's got windows and door. It's like gonna work. But it also is a movie which just has really subtle humor in it. Like when Sean and Ed first find the girl who's the zombie in their backyard, and they push her off and she falls on the lead pipe, and it's like, oh geez, and she starts getting up and they realize that, oh, she's like a zombie or something, and they're both kind of looking at it flabbergasted, and Ed just kind of starts cranking the camera like he's ready to take a picture, and it's just a simple little thing, just click, 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 and it's hysterical. Or like when they're trying to get their other roommate's attention, Pete, what's going on, Pete? It's like, hey, prick, he just shouts up the stairwell. So that was funny, and just the whole thing with Ed, he doesn't take anything seriously, and he just, except for the fact that he loves the idea of being able to drive the Jaguar. And of course, Sean has a failing relationship that isn't going anywhere. These 2 really annoying roommates that his girlfriend has, they got to take along with them. And they're even trying to shoehorn in this whole arc about his stepfather not really being a good father and stuff. And how only now during the zombie apocalypse is Sean actually listening and having a moment, which of course Ed doesn't care about because he's just more excited about, driving the Jag and, killing zombies. So it's just very weird. Like when you have the whole bit, even when they're trying to rehearse pretending to be zombies to move through the crowd, and he asked how Sean's mom is going to do it. She was like daydreaming and not even paying attention. Like, good, that's great, that's going to work. So it's just that little silly type of reverence that doesn't, like when they run across all the friends who look exactly like them, and he's like, "What's your plan?" And it's like, "Oh, we're going to go to the pub." And it's like, really? And they don't share what their plan is going to be. They just look at them very judgmentally, like, "Oh, that's what you're going to do?" It's like, okay, bye. And yeah, the climax is admittedly riffing on a lot of those movies where you got to hole up and save yourselves type thing. And I really hated it that Ed, spoiler alert, gets it and turns into a zombie. But I did like how they kind of brought it around at the very end, where he keeps Ed in a shed playing video games, which is kind of sad, but also really funny. And I'm thinking, you have him sitting there right next to you, in biting range, and he almost bites you, and then you're not even paying attention, and it's like, God, I guess nothing's really changed. But that was a really great parody film. A lot of British humor in it, which is also why I think it really works. So as far as zombie, and I thought it pretty much sums up everything about, it's making fun of the idea that people always feel like their lives are going nowhere like zombies, so let's actually use that to tell a story rather than just the typical, oh, we have to survive the apocalypse and we have to contend with other, bandits and stuff like that, which has been done to death, which is why I just had no reaction at all to the Last of Us TV series. It's like I've seen all of this before a million times already, but Shaun of the Dead felt like a different flavor,
Yeah, and you're right about how he treats his friend at the end, where he's almost like, hey, stop playing around, and it's like, well, he's a zombie. Stop playing around. That's what zombies do. They're going to want to like bite you. And it's hilarious. And his attitude is almost like a happy-go-lucky, just another day kind of going around his neighborhood, and the camera focusing on him. You can just kind of like really see he's not paying attention to what's going on around him. It's kind of refreshing to see somebody who just doesn't care, necessarily, or, is more focused on, what's going on right directly in front of them versus all that other stuff, all the distractions out there. But he certainly is great. He pulls it in, and you do get kind of absorbed. It's very contiguous from that film to when he plays the police officer, and he's kind of the same character, but he's just a cop now, right, Catherine?
Yeah, and but another thing I also like about Shaun of the Dead is that even though everybody else is kind of putting him down in the movie for being a loser or whatever, he's the only one who at least has a plan and is striving to keep everybody to it and keep everybody alive. Whereas everybody else is just being super judgmental. And as annoying as Ed is, like when he reveals that he's had a cell phone this whole time and they're cornered about to be killed, it's like, huh? No, I can talk. It's like, but it's funny that even in a comedy like that, Edgar Wright manages to tell a good, like, character drama type story that here's somebody whose life is admittedly going nowhere. He's a loser, not so much because he is a loser. It's that everybody else keeps telling him that he's a loser, and it's like that's not really the case. And so I did think that was kind of a neat. It's like, wow, you actually put a nice, poignant kind of storyline in there, which was fun. Now the middle film, Hot Fuzz, again, a lot of British humor, and this really riffs on, the whole police drama comedies and. It feels a bit almost like The Wicker Man, because as the super cop, he's the only one who's aware that there's clearly something fishy going on around here, despite that everybody's trying to avoid it. It's got a stacked cast of famous British actors, many of whom I had to look up afterwards because I hadn't seen them before. I did recognize Timothy Dalton, of course, and loved him as the supermarket king. And I love, the old trope where you're going to uncover this vast conspiracy, and it's like, yeah, that really sounds good, but no, it's actually a lot dumber than that. but it's just. And making fun of small town corruption and small town politics, how they always want to appear, oh, we're perfect and all that kind of stuff. It's like, no, not really. And just how the fact that the reason he's sent there to begin with is because he's making the rest of the police force look bad, which in that case is like, maybe you should put him in charge of one of your departments in London instead of just shipping him off. It's like, really? You don't want him stopping crime? It's like, okay. And I love that very quick blink and you miss it Peter Jackson cameo as Santa Claus stabbing him with a knife, and I was like, I kind of recognized him too. I'm like, is that? I'm like, no, it can't be. But then I found out it was. So the everything going on up in the small town and how they're making fun of it by calling it the Neighborhood Watch Alliance, okay, the NWA, and all the people they've murdered, and they're riffing on things like Chinatown or Maltese Falcon and Wicker Man and all these types of films, but again, it's doing it in a way that's, yes, it's over the top and silly, but it still fits like that kind of British humor, because he's the person who everybody's making fun of and putting down, but he's actually the smart guy this time. Much like how Sean was the only one who had a plan. Nicholas Angel is the only, named after the music supervisor of the film, actually, is the only one who's actually paying attention. And at the very least, even though he's wrong about the nature of the conspiracy and the reason behind it, he is right about the fact that these are clearly murders, and everybody else is like when he talks to Ed through the whole thing, and at the end of it, Ed's like, or not Ed, his character name in that one was or Nick or whatever, and he's like, well, maybe they were all just accidents, and everybody else is like getting fed up with this theory. He's like, yeah, because you're such a big fan of murder. I'm like, what the hell does that even mean? But it was just hysterical because it has that whole line of humor in it, and seeing him get to become the real super cop at the end, going through this quaint, English village and just, mowing people down was just really hilarious, especially when he gets Nick to confront his father and betray him. And once the father decides to take off, they add this actual sound effect of a lion's roar as the chandelier is falling, and he's like, that's the anthem. Like, did they actually do this? This is kind of funny. And it's just, what'd you think of this movie? I thought it was hysterical. I loved it.
I loved it too. It really does show the talent that he has for just comedy. Edgar Wright really knows exactly what people want to see, I think, as well. I think people want to laugh and enjoy themselves and, have a laugh at stuff. And it's not necessarily always easy to make jokes about zombies or the police force. But, you know, I don't think we've seen a comedy of the police force on British soil in a long time. Like, I don't remember seeing one ever. So this might be a first. And, you know, we've seen some zombie films that push the limit a little bit, but I think this one might have been the most the most extreme version. So, you know, I think in both, they're both fantastic films, and I've watched them many times. I haven't watched them recently, but I have watched them many times.
Yeah, and when you contrast it with something like Beverly Hills Cop and the way that's trying to be funny with police humor, it's like, well, this is doing it more in like the procedural way, and just, you know, how everybody turns a blind eye to small town corruption, crime, and stuff, and how people just kind of, like, you look at how much more adept cops are probably in the city because of the sheer amount of crime and everything they're working on, whereas in the city where you're kind of lazed back, and so that's kind of what Nick Frost and his cohorts at the department kind of represent. And I love how they make allusions to, oh, there's got to be a ton of paperwork now that you've, you know, gone through, which they never show in, you know, other movies. And I like that they kind of showed it here, and you know, then again, to my point about how it's sort of riffing on The Wicker Man, they bring in Edward Woodward as one of the bad guys, which was kind of fun, and seeing Paul Freeman as the priest was really funny. You know, F off, grasshopper. And I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy who's the deaf guy on the farm, in reality, he actually lost his hearing testing one of the first long-range artillery pieces in World War II. So I like that he's actually the guy who's got like this whole arsenal inside his barn with the unexploded vine stuff. So that was really funny. But yeah, that was a great film, and it's my favorite of the three. Now the third one, The World's End, I thought that one kind of falters a bit because they kind of switched the roles, where Nick Frost is now playing the responsible square, and, you know, Simon Pegg is trying to play the loser and the idiot, and I just didn't think, it didn't feel as natural to me, just didn't seem to work as well. And, you know, they're basically just doing this pub crawl during an alien invasion, and it's like, okay, and it's sort of riffing on Invasion of the Body Snatchers type tropes, but I just didn't think it was funny. It just kind of felt more forced and like a traditional dumb comedy that just didn't have that same level of writing as the first two. And again, I think that's because it's like Nick Frost and Simon Pegg were doing what they were best at in the first two, and then you flip that around again. Something they also did in another film of theirs, Paul, which is riffing on, you know, Aliens and Comic-Con, where once again, Nick Frost is kind of playing the smarter, grounded one between the two, and Simon's the more silly one. I just find that doesn't really work. When you switch the roles, it's kind of playing against their strengths. I just found Simon's character in The World's End to be kind of annoying. But it's cool to see Pierce Brosnan in there, and you know, they brought back people from Pop Fuzz and previous cast, so it was okay. But I thought it was a disappointing end for that, you know, figurative trilogy. You know.
Yeah, it didn't seem to have the same sense of feeling or sense of intensity as the other two films had, and the pace was very different as well. So, you know, and I give them an A for effort for trying to push the envelope more, but it was not as good as the first two films. However, certainly a unique spin to try and do something like that, which I don't think was very easy to even come up with a concept for it. But you know, I think that overall, the first two are the stronger films. And the last one, it kind of feels like it winds down the momentum of the first two.
Right, because the first two are also, it's like for a zombie comedy, it's still using a classic zombie plot, which is there's a zombie apocalypse, we need to get out of here. In Hot Fuzz, it's a classic super cop type plot where he's better than everybody else and thinks he knows everything, and they don't, and it's still fitting into that. This third one, for an alien invasion sci-fi, it's like surrounding a pub crawl. It's like, well, that's not really an alien invasion type plot. That's just some weird thing you're having them do for the excuse of having Simon Pegg be this over-the-top, ridiculous, you know, drunkard. Which, so it didn't really work for me. But, you know, it's in other words, if I had bought these individually, I would not have gotten the third one. It's in the pack, and it was cheap on Prime Day, which is why I got the standard Blu-ray instead of the 4K. It's like, I don't need that in 4K. Mm-hmm. This next one is a A24 film from last year. It kind of came out and was pretty surprising, and that's Bodies, Bodies, Bodies.
Oh, wow.
A Gen Z comedy about these Gen Zers who are gathered at a house it's in New York. It looks more like it's in upstate New York, but according to the story, it's supposed to be like near the coast. And they're living in this kind of mansion. It's very secluded from any of their neighbors or anywhere else, and it's these kids who have the house to themselves for the weekend, and they're having a party, and one of their estranged friends comes back to see them, having not been there for years, and she brings along her new girlfriend, played by Maria Balakova right there. And there's kind of animosity initially at the house. It's like, why are you here? We don't really like you because you kind of we're like a whistleblower about our drug use with our parents, stuff like that. And it's sort of like they kind of just accept that she's there. It's the Pete Davidson character's house. And it's like each character, it's like this, it's like imagine a slumber party, but again, with a bunch of Gen Zers in their early 20s acting like a bunch of like prissy teenagers. And what happens is they decide to play a game that night, like a, murder in the dark type. They call it Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. I've never heard the game called that. When I was a kid, it was called Murder in the Dark, where you draw a roll out of a hat, and you don't show anybody else what your job is, and you turn off the lights, and some people are going to be victims. One person's going to be a detective, another's going to be the murderer, and you got to suss them out. Fun little slumber party game. Except somebody actually dies while they're playing the game, and they're worried, and they think, "Oh, geez, what's going on?" And the whole movie is like them just sniping at each other and being paranoid about, again, bringing up all of their past problems, and and it has a really great punchline. Mark.
Hey, Terry, thanks again for another 50 kroner super chat. Thank you so much, Terry. Says, have to head to bed. Eyelids are as heavy as steel books. Enjoy the broadcast, ladies. Remainder of paid message donated to saying, Todd Michael is cool.
Yes, he is.
All right. Thank you so much, Terry. And a shout out to Todd Michael, wherever you are, Todd Michael. I haven't spoken to you for a while, but hope you are well.
So, this whole movie takes place pretty much during the storm at night in the dark, and they have all their glow sticks, and I'm trying to see what's going on. And it's like, I thought it was kind of sharp writing, because something like that could get annoying really fast. And I'm sure a lot of people are annoyed by it. It's definitely like its own niche type of thing, but I was rolling with it because I thought it was really funny, because in a sense, there's not much redeemable about any of these characters. Like, I care less if you all die, but at the same time, I thought it was, except for maybe Maria Balakova's character. She was actually kind of likable, but I thought it just had a hysterical punchline.
Wow.
Which if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to spoil it.
I haven't seen it.
I'm not going to spoil it, but it's got a great punchline to it. And it's also a nice short movie for a change. It's like 88 minutes, 85 minutes or so, which is kind of nice to see a nice shorter movie these days. Everything seems to be 2.5. It's like not everything needs to be that long, especially for a comedy, a fun little comedy with a lot of sharp writing and dialogue, and everybody just kind of making assumptions about each other that they don't understand. Like, oh, this guy, he's a vet. Oh, yeah, he's like an army vet. He's scary. He's like, no, I'm a vet, like, a veterinarian. And it's like, it's a lot of that type of stuff going on. And it's just really, I thought the movie was wickedly funny. It didn't, it was A24 release, so it didn't get a big rollout, but I thought it was quite good.
Yeah, I'm going to check that out. I put it on my list, Catherine.
And that's kind of surprising, too, in that for some reason the 4K was made that I got here was a Best Buy exclusive. Like, and I've never heard about that before, like where they would take a specific format and make it exclusive to one retailer. Like, I've heard of, exclusives where they, have a bunch of bells and whistles that they include, like posters and stuff like that. But saying that the actual 4K format is only available at one retailer, I thought was really bizarre. So I thought it was unique enough that I should probably snag this. And the tagline for the movie is, "This is not a safe space," which I love, because we're making fun of that whole thing as well, that whole concept of this next one is an oldie but an absolute classic from John Hughes. It is, of course, The Breakfast Club.
Yeah,
this is my favorite John Hughes film, in which we have all these classic stereotypes. You have the prissy, sassy, queen bee. You have the jock. You have the nerd. You have the weirdo, and then you have the troublemaker rebel, all stuck having to spend detention on a Saturday at the school, which I don't even know if that was ever a thing. It's like, why would a teacher want to come in and spend their Saturday at a school, especially given that teachers also work a lot grading papers and having to read essays and stuff afterwards? They're really going to want to come in on a Saturday. And so the guy playing the teacher, I thought, okay, you must really hate these kids. And you can tell he kind of does. Like, even the janitor kind of gives him shit about that at some point in the movie. Like, dude, you're kind of, you need to, you know, wake up and get your head out of the clouds, man. But it's kind of like these students, it starts with these ridiculously cartoonish stereotypes. And yeah, it's been criticized for the way it kind of breaks down in the end, almost a little conveniently, how they're all friends, but you do kind of, it pushes through the stereotypes and you find out why everybody is the way they are. And the most of it I like is just kids just sitting around talking. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have, they're not action in terms of like guns and cartridge, but it's not like any action-based type stuff. It's just sitting around talking and learning more about themselves. And it's just a very for a dialogue-driven movie that does that well. And granted, it is still stereotypical. You know, all the characters are white. They're all middle class. So it's not like it's speaking to all of America, especially the different. Because there's a lot of students I knew when I went to school who were nothing like this. Even the ones who would thinly fit into those types of stereotypes are a lot more dimensional than the characters in this film. But that doesn't mean the movie isn't good. It's a classic, and it's a really good movie. I thought it was very well cast as well. And yeah, some of the kids are just jackasses, like the jock. When you learn why he's there, and he's like, oh, it's because of my dad, and he's a jerk. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not sympathetic to this cause. I'm not sympathetic to people who say they make other people's lives a living hell just because they're too afraid to stand up to the people at home. It's like, I've never really jived with that. And the weirdo is obviously over-exaggerated with the stuff that she's doing. And but yeah, I still love this movie. What'd you think?
Yeah, I love it too, and I think it feels like a play to me. You know, it could be adapted like for as a play on Broadway or something like that. Or I could see kids in a high school even putting on this as a performance, and it is a lot of fun just to see high school life in the 80s. And yes, these cliques existed, and you know, we all saw them walking through the hallways. At least, well, I went to an all-girls Catholic school, so we didn't have any boys, but yes, we had cliques, and you know, we saw everybody kind of go to their group, and you know, a lot of times they didn't necessarily intermingle, and it was kind of fun to watch this. They have a beautiful high school, so I don't necessarily feel bad for any of them because everything looks so shiny and new.
I do know that they built the library set in the gymnasium because the library wasn't that big and beautiful, which if it was, I would be amazed because I mean, I remember my elementary school had a pretty big, like the library building itself was kind of big, but they put other classrooms in there and retrofitted. But seeing stuff like that is like, I'm like, that would be a great high school. I mean, my high school was pretty great too, compared to my middle school, which looked kind of like the mental hospital from Terminator 2, in terms of its design compared to the high school. But yeah, so it was a good movie. And it never gets old either. I can watch it on repeat, which is kind of, that doesn't happen for you very often.
Yeah, it doesn't get old. And yeah, I think that it was a film of, you know, I think the take home message of the film was that, you know, the kindness can go a long way in high school. And I think they learned that especially for some of the characters who maybe no one really had been kind, but even the song, Catherine, where it's like, don't you forget about me. If you see me in the hallway, will you walk on by? Will you call my name? That certainly was at the heart of this entire story. And I love that they were able to tie in such a heartfelt sounding song into the theme of
yeah, because that was the big point of ambiguity at the end of the film, which is like, yeah, we're all friends, but what about on Monday? Are you gonna? It's like, yeah, it's easy for us to say, let's extend our detention and keep coming here because it's fun to hang out now that we're friends, but are we gonna be friends come Monday? Is that gonna happen? Like, is this sort of budding relationship between the rebel and the queen bee gonna go? Is it only gonna be something happening in secret on Saturdays, or is it gonna, you know, actually happen on Monday? And they never answer the question, which is neat. Like, I imagine had they ever thought of doing a sequel back then, you'd just base it on the next Saturday, and it would be about all the things that happened during that week. Those who were mad at each other for not acknowledging it, those who were like, hey, it's happening. Because admittedly, there wouldn't be much of a story if they did all stay friends during the week. It would be more, from that point, it would have to be the perspective of other students saying, wow, look what happened here. But I do like that that's the big point of ambiguity, and the song literally is about that. As much as the band, understandably, is annoyed that the song ended up being as popular as it was, and led to them sort of breaking up because they just got tired of people always asking them to play that song, and they're just done with it. You know, certain songs you can only hear it so many times where everybody's like, stop. But that was I love that movie.
Yeah, I love it too.
This next one is an absolute classic. might be a generational thing. Not many people of modern generation might like it as much. Arguably the most realistic cop movie ever made, which is either to its benefit or against it, depending on where you stand. And that is, of course, the Steve McQueen classic Bullitt.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So this is a movie where it's so real. Like, it focuses a lot on the monotony of the day-by-day stuff, the paperwork and all of that, that by the time you get to, like, the iconic car chase, I saw this movie a long time ago for the first time, and I never really thought the car chase was particularly great. It's just that it's something that stands out given how monotonous the rest. And when I say monotonous, I don't mean boring, but it's so simple and very realistic, like what actual police work is like. It's not like you see in primetime crime shows. It's not like what you see in buddy cop comedies at all. And the car chase, of course, it starts in San Francisco where they're jumping a few hills, which is kind of cool. But once they go north on the Golden Gate Bridge, they go to a completely different filming location, because that's not at all what north of the Golden Gate Bridge looks like. But it kind of started resembling like a modern car commercial at that point, where it's just the cars driving down the windy road with slick kind of camera work. It's like, this isn't really a chase anymore, but okay. And the car, which Americans will say that the Bullitt Mustang is like the most famous movie car of all. It's like, I would disagree with that. I think James Bond's DB5 is a bit more popular, but you'll notice in the first 45 minutes of the movie, he's driving a brown station wagon, and he only drives the green Mustang during the chase sequence. And that's it. And after that, he goes back to using other cars. But this is a movie where, you know, oftentimes I can't even remember what the actual plot of the movie is or the mystery, because it's that mundane. But the way Steve McQueen plays the character is just, again, the epitome of cool. He's wearing his gun just like Officer Dave Tossi did with SFPD, whom he shadowed to study for playing this character. A reference they even make in Fincher's Zodiac film as well. And this is and I get why this isn't a movie I would necessarily show to somebody if I'm trying to introduce them to Steve McQueen, and why he's really cool. Because again, it is a very trying kind of monotonous, especially when you're coming off of how for the last 40 or 50 years, Hollywood's been brainwashing people through primetime, as to what cops do through, like, you know, primetime cop shows, which are always, one, they're benefit because they're shorter, 44 minutes with commercials, and they just go through all the typical 3-act structure, and they have unrealistic amounts of action and stuff. But this is very real to the point that even today, 55 years later, it's still praised for its accuracy. And this film actually does include a really great documentary on editing on it, which I got to watch in film school. So that, and it is a very well edited film, and not just in terms of the edit where you need to cut, but also where you shouldn't cut, in terms of saying this is why this works, because they let things, like, they let the shot linger. You let scenes leisurely play out. We're not in a rush to the next plot point. It's more about this character and his dedication to the job. And so I think it's still a really good movie, but understandably something that modern younger audiences might have a problem with today.
Yeah, and I think younger audiences would say that it's dated. This is a term that I've heard, and it's not anything you and I haven't said about other films, but I think, you know, a younger person would definitely look at this and say, oh man, this is like from 19 when? And I could see them saying that, you know, Steve McQueen really sells this character so well. I've watched this film many times on Turner Classics because they tend to show it a lot. And sometimes they'll show the trailer, Catherine. And that trailer where they're, you know, it'll be some guy who will say, he's a police officer, you know, fighting crime, you know, like, and it's a lot of it is setting the sort of tone of having that, being that authority figure as a cop, which I think held a lot more weight at the time Bullitt was made than being a police officer might hold in the general public's psyche today. So I think that, you know, as being a detective and being able to kind of like be an enforcer and have that role, you know, might have held a little bit more weight. I think that the introduction of these sort of CSI shows where we see police officers, and it's got a different feel to it. It doesn't have that same intensity. Bullitt.
Yeah, because Bullitt was also from a time where you had the actual cop TV shows were very much surrounded the badge, you know, and surrounded what that means and the character of the police officer rather than just plot. Like things like CSI, it's like, yeah, you have characters and there's nothing remotely believable about any of it, because lab techs they're not detectives in the sense that they don't get to interview witnesses because there's conflict of interest there. They don't carry guns. They don't go to SWAT. It's so ridiculous and stupid. But yeah, I still watched it because it was still fun to watch. I knew it wasn't real, but like those are more plot oriented stuff. Whereas the shows back then which is kind of some of the stuff that was even commented on in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, like those types of shows surrounding, like even though it was a period piece thing that the DiCaprio character is playing when he's in Bounty Law, it's still something that's surrounding that character, that specific lawman, which you don't see cop shows like that today. Like again, today it's more like Law and Order or CSI, and it's about the whole team effort and the plot of it, whereas back in those days, something like Bullitt would be revered a lot more because it is surrounding the heroism of like the cop, which is why Dirty Harry was such a shocking thing when it came out just 3 years later. And we'll eventually get to that when I get there. Actually, that's on my digital collection, but we can still talk about that. Or I might as well just talk about it now because we're here talking about it. But Dirty Harry is like, yes, it's a cop, but he's not doing all the things that these star hero. Okay, he's not doing everything by the book like all these other cops did. So it was shocking, even though he's still a guy who's clearly doing the right thing for the right reasons. And again, tying it back into Bullitt, the Steve McQueen shadowing Dave Tossie of the SFPD. Tossie, of course, leading the SFPD's Zodiac hunt, and Dirty Harry being a riff on the movie or on the Zodiac case. So it's like it's kind of all connected in that way. Mm-hmm. But again, Dirty Harry stood out in its time period because it was something that seemed, oh, how could you have a movie that's idolizing a dirty cop? And it's like, well, the irony is that he's not dirty because he's not immoral, not too immoral, a little bit, but he's standing up for what is ethically, standing up for the rights of the victims more than the rights of the accused. And in particular, the accused in each of the Dirty Harry movies are clearly guilty. He's never wrong about who it is that he's going after. But you see how that would obviously be very shocking to the audience who would revere somebody like Frank Bullitt. And so that's a really neat kind of how just 3 years later, after coming off something like Bullitt, which has staying power, you had Dirty Harry, which has, extreme staying power. So that's a very, but alas, I do not have the Dirty Harry films on physical media. I have HD digital copies, but I'm waiting for them to potentially put it on. I was hopeful they would get a 4K for 2021 for the 50th anniversary for the first one, and that didn't happen. So now I'm not as hopeful. And I joked that if there's any franchise they haven't touched yet to reboot that's Dirty Harry, and I thought, you know what, that would actually be kind of interesting given the conversation around police and stuff today, because that would be a real challenge. Like, how do you do that today? It'd be controversial, and it's like, yeah, great, controversy sells, so that actually might not be a bad idea. But
I would hire his son, the one who's in films now. I can't remember his name.
Eastwood?
Yes. Yeah. And I'd have him play the role. But another thing too is, of course, the pun on the name Bullitt, which is supposed to like a bullet in a gun, the focus on the weapons that police officers use. Dirty Harry and his 40, it's maybe not a 45, but very specific weapons, very specific images of these police officers and their authority, and the fact that they have this authority, and they're dedicated to finding the criminals. And I think that it is really interesting to look at how that dynamic has changed. Certainly, even from the promotional photo of Bullitt, as you said, the way he's standing, this is no ordinary police officer, and you believe it. Like, he isn't an ordinary police officer by a long shot. It is a great film. You did talk about that iconic chase in the streets of San Francisco, which you'd have to close down all of San Francisco to do that now, I guess, because there's so much traffic. But at the time, I wouldn't be so surprised if they did that and only closed a few streets.
Yeah, because it's like in the original Gone in 60 Seconds from 1974, they have the first half of the movie is terrible because the writing and the dialogue and the acting is atrocious. The only reason they even have the first half of the movie in a plot is because this guy wanted to make the greatest car chase ever, and he wanted it to be feature length to get it in a movie theater. And the second half is just the chase with the Eleanor car that this guy's stolen, driving through Los Angeles for like 45 minutes. And they were able to get away shooting it on a Sunday, or not a Sunday, but all on Sundays, because the film permit office was closed on Sundays, and there was a loophole that said, oh, technically you're still allowed to shoot on Sundays just because the office is closed. That's on them. But they would do crazy stuff. Like, I was surprised that there's a scene, for instance, where they're driving across this park, and it's not stunt guys who are jumping out of the way to avoid it. A lot of it are just regular people who've been told, hey, you want to be in a movie, just doing it. And because, again, there was no permit office, so they're able to get away with stuff. There was another instance where they had a helicopter shot filming him veer off the freeway.
Yeah.
He accidentally hit a streetlight and knocked it over on the freeway, and they keep going because they got the helicopter shot, and so they kept on going and never reported it, and that they did it. And so, but it's in the finished movie. Now, obviously, they were trying to be safe about it too. It's not like they randomly drove the car into the park and whoever got out of the way did, and whoever didn't get. They just said, like, "Hey, people, you want to be in a movie? Sure, let's do it." So you had that crazy stuff happen back then that you could get away with. That you just, like you said, you can't get away with that in a million years, but by today's standards, which might be a good thing when you think about it. But yeah, the bullet chaser when the cars are flying down the hills and banging. And no damage to the cars either, it seems at times. And it's like there have been other movies which have tried to homage that with, the streets of San Francisco, bounced up. But Bullitt was the one that was iconic. And I think the reason it stands out as much as it does is because it's such a huge jump from the sort of monotony of day-to-day police work to something that's that intense, at least for its time period. I mean, I admit when I saw this movie for the first time in 2010, I believe, it didn't feel as intense.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, this is the car chase I've been told about. And, we got a Bullitt Mustang in our garage, same type of thing. But, and I get why people think it's cool, because it certainly looks cool.
It does look cool.
He only drives this car for the car chase. It's like they brought it in for that, and the rest of the time he drives a boring old station wagon. But yeah, it's iconic cop movie. What can I say? Bullitt. This next one here, last one of the regular ones that I've pulled out. A comedy from 1989 that I absolutely love, The Burbs. This whole movie was shot on the cul-de-sac on the backlot of Universal Studios, which have been used for all sorts of things, like The Munsters, more recently Desperate Housewives, and other films like this. And the plot of the movie is Tom Hanks plays like a regular guy, and he's married to Carrie Fisher, and he just wants to have a regular life. And they're going to go away they're planning to go on a vacation for a week. But the new neighbors have moved in across the street, and they're not taking care of the house, the Klopex, and it's like falling into disrepair. And it's almost like a riff on the Munster, because they are living in the Munster's house, and they do seem kind of creepy. And he's got a neighbor played by the late, great Rick Ducommun, Canadian comedian, who is hilarious, who's almost like very childlike and imagining all these horrible things are happening next door with the cannibals and all that type of stuff and the murders. And it's hilarious because he's actually proven right through the course of the film. And their other neighbor, Bruce, played wonderfully by Bruce Dern, as the total military nut who you can tell he just wants to go back to war, and he's just finding the perfect excuse to do it. And down the street, you got Corey Feldman as the teenager, rebel, eating pizza and having block parties, is just kind of amused by everything that they're doing, that his neighbors are doing. And Tom Hanks is just not wanting to get dragged into this stuff, but he keeps finding himself dragged in deeper and deeper, and it's hilarious. And you got Henry Gibson playing like the head of this family, doing it so well. He's a great character actor. He played the head of the neo-Nazi rally and the Blues Brothers and other stuff like that. So seeing him here as like this mild-mannered, nice guy who turns out to be just as evil as the neighbors suspect him as. Courtney Gaines as the son who doesn't ever say anything. He's like a mute. But this is just a really funny, good kind of comedy it's silly, but it works. And I think it's one of the best of the Tom Hanks comedies of the 80s. He's in a lot of comedies. A lot of them are kind of forgetful, or some of them aren't even available on physical or digital media anymore. But this one is, and I found it worked really well, and it made me wish that Rick Ducommun had more central roles in movies. He didn't really get a lot more after that. I didn't actually see him again until in a movie after that, until the first Scary Movie in the year 2000. And it's like, man, how did this guy not get more roles after that? And Bruce Dern, great comedy turn. I wouldn't see him as another comedy turn like that till Nebraska in 2013, which is hilarious as well. But this was another movie I'd seen from my childhood. Very, very memorable. Very, very quite good.
Yeah, I can't say enough about The Burbs. And, I remember there was watching the film with my family, and there was this one line where they're in the basement, the haunted house's basement, if you want to put it that way. Their neighbor's basement, they don't take care of it. And when they go down into the basement, they look at the furnace and they're like, does your furnace go up to 3,900 degrees or something?
When the dog brings back the femur when they're playing fetch, and his neighbor's like, this is evil. And it's like, Tom Hanks is supposed to be the voice of reason in the film. It's like, no, it's not. And it's like, dude, it's an actual human femur. You could tell it's the most recognizable, aside from the skull, it's probably the most recognizable bone in the human body. He's like, oh, it can't be. And like when he has the nightmares about the sacrifices happening in the backyard, and yet all this is happening. And I love it when Henry Gibson just comes around. He's like, yes, if they had been more reasonable, maybe we would have bought the house. But no. And when they try and make their escape, and you have that great punchline where there's like, well, we have no evidence of anything. There's nothing. The cops like, there's nothing you could do. And Corey Feldman's just sitting by the trunk of the car and opens it. He's like, you do now. And his girlfriend just starts screaming, and they've got like all the bones, which apparently I guess they didn't bother burning in the crematorium for whatever reason. They just have them, in the trunk of the car. But that whole ending was also really funny and reshot a couple times. There's a few different alternate endings on the Blu-ray, but God, that was a hilarious film.
Yeah, it was suburb heaven, but there was something wrong with one of the neighbors, and the Corey Feldman, you're right about the pizza parties. He invited his friends, and he was like, no, you guys got to stick around for the best part tonight. He knew his neighbors were going to be doing crazy things. The neighbor who's the former military, he's got those infrared glasses, but he falls off the roof. Like it's just a lot of slapstick comedy, but done so well. The acting is done so well that it reads true. Like I believe that they were living in this cul-de-sac, which is really just like a little piece of heaven where they were. So it really is a classic comedy. It feels like 80s lifestyle. It feels like an 80s. I remember growing up during that time period, and it was like that. That's how your lifestyle was like. So there are a lot of things in it that feel very that I think I treasure. But it's funny. It's hilarious. This is just like it's a classic. I consider it a classic comedy now. He made Big, which was another. Maybe that wasn't necessarily a comedy because he kind of like.
It's kind of mixed.
Yeah, and then he also had I don't know whether Splash is supposed to be a comedy or not, but like let's see.
I still haven't seen that. I should watch it. It's on Disney Plus, but I was like, I hadn't even thought about that movie in so many years until people complained about the editing controversy over it, and it's like, whatever. But I still haven't watched that movie yet. But I remember I haven't seen Big in a long time, but I remember that story being more of a kind of like a sweet, but something obviously you couldn't make today for reasons. And but I still liked that one as well. I thought that was kind of a cute movie and reflects a different type of innocence that again you can't that won't really fly today. But it's still fun and
It is. And Carrie Fisher being, his wife and kind of like telling the boys that he can't go out today. No, he's not going out today.
And that movie, The Burbs, you could still make today. That one, that one is, and I love that bit from her as well. She's like, for once, she's actually playing a total square and just normal person, which usually isn't what Carrie plays. Like you said, he's not going to go out to play with you guys today, and they're just.
Oh, it was such a classic. I love that film so much, Catherine.
So that's all the films I grabbed today because I was finishing off the Bees.
Okay, well, it's an excellent selection, and I enjoyed this very much. It was talking about so many fantastic films you have on physical media, Catherine. So thank you so much for coming back. Of course, you will be back to continue Cat's Corner. Catherine, where can people find you?
You can find me at Sly Snide, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. You can find me on the Virtual Cantina Network, streaming at 8 a.m. Pacific every second and fourth Sunday in the month, co-hosting the Unifying Force Star Wars show. And you can find me on the Fantasmagorium show YouTube channel, where we got a lot of playlists where we reviewed James Bond movies, Tarantino movies, Robert Rodriguez films, and Batman movies, and Spider-Man movies. And we just finished our Indiana Jones series, so that'll be fun. So just check those all out. They're fun.
Absolutely, guys. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Fantasmagorium channel, as well as the Virtual Cantina Network, which is also on YouTube. I don't have the link, but I'll have it the next time. And you can check out Catherine at Sly Side. Guys, make sure you please subscribe to my channel, which is Positive Fandom, guys, where I do all the parlay in the fandom. Certainly would appreciate a like and a subscription there. And also to Tom Jr. Jackson's channel, which I am looking for. Tom, I know you put it in here. Tom is the moderator, collaborator, and good friend here to the channel. Guys, you know him, you love him. He's pretty much here all the time. Here it is. Guys, subscribe to Tom Jr. Jackson's YouTube channel. Tom has tons of reviews on his channel. He also does a live Funko Pop show and so much more. So please make sure you do that. We are all good people, Tom. I want to thank all of you in the chat for the contributions, especially Terrier. Terrier, I know you are asleep now, but I so appreciate your super sticker as well as a super chat. I hope you are having steelbook dreams, Terrier. And everybody out there, thank you so much for the kind words and comments. We will be back for Cat's Corner episode 4 coming up soon here on the Burnettwork, guys. And remember, no matter where you are in the galaxy, guys, always remember to please be kind. Bye.